At the luxury wedding, the disabled boy was drowning. When the young black cleaner removed her uniform, the wealthy guests couldn't believe what happened next. Zara's shoes squeaked against the wet tiles surrounding the Winters swimming pool. The morning sun bounced off the water's surface, hitting her eyes as she dragged the pool net through the crystalline water. Her work uniform clung to her skin in the humid morning air, and sweat trickled down her back despite the early hour. "Make sure everything is spotless for the wedding," Mrs. Peterson, the head housekeeper, called from the terrace. "The ceremony starts at 4, and we can't have any leaves in the pool." "Yes, ma'am," Zara replied, keeping her eyes on the water. The sound of delivery trucks and workers setting up chairs filled the backyard. Zara glanced at the growing crowd of staff members rushing around with flowers, tablecloths, and champagne glasses. None of them looked her way. At 16, she was used to being invisible. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Mom's message lit up the screen. "Working double shift again tonight. Left dinner in fridge." "Don't wait up." Zara's throat tightened. She remembered finding her mother passed out on their apartment floor 8 months ago, still in her waitress uniform. The doctor had called it exhaustion, but they both knew it was more than that. The medical bills still sat unpaid on their kitchen counter. The pool net caught on something. Zara leaned forward, squinting against the glare. A dead bee floated near the drain, its wings spread wide. As she scooped it out, chlorine water splashed her face. And for a moment, she was back in her old swimming pool, preparing for the state championships. "Watch out!" A sharp voice snapped her back to reality. One of the catering staff nearly collided with her, carrying a tower of champagne flutes. The glasses wobbled precariously. "Sorry," Zara mumbled, stepping aside. "Just stay out of the way," the woman huffed, hurrying past. Zara gripped the pool net tighter. A year ago, she'd been training for a swimming scholarship. Now she cleaned other people's pools. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Mom, look, the pool is so blue." The excited voice drew Zara's attention to Tommy Winters, the 12-year-old son of the house. He sat in his wheelchair at the edge of the terrace, pointing at the water. His mother, elegant in a designer dress, stood beside him. "Yes, honey, it's beautiful," Mrs. Winters replied, distracted by something on her phone. "But remember, you need to stay away from it during the wedding." Tommy's face fell. "But I wanted to show Sarah. She's never seen our pool." "Not today, sweetheart. It's your sister's wedding." Zara watched them from the corner of her eye while emptying the pool net. She'd seen Tommy watching her clean the pool before, always from a distance. His cerebral palsy confined him to the wheelchair, but his eyes followed the ripples in the water with longing. The morning wore on. Florists transformed the terrace into a flower-covered paradise. Wedding planners rushed around with clipboards and earpieces. Caterers wheeled in carts loaded with exotic-smelling dishes. Zara continued her work, moving around them like a shadow. During her lunch break, she sat alone behind the pool house, eating a peanut butter sandwich. Voices drifted over from the service entrance. "Did you hear about downtown?" One of the cleaning staff was saying. "They're raising all the rents next month. My cousin just got her notice." "Again?" "That's the 3rd time this year." Zara's sandwich turned to ash in her mouth. Their apartment was in downtown. They could barely afford the current rent. The afternoon sun beat down as she finished her tasks. Her old swimming coach's words echoed in her head. "You've got Olympic potential, kid. Don't waste it." But potential didn't pay bills. Neither did dreams. A commotion near the house caught her attention. The bride had arrived for final preparations. Jessica Winters, beautiful in her white robe, swept past with her entourage of bridesmaids. Their laughter carried across the pool area. "Oh my God, everything is perfect," Jessica squealed, clapping her hands. Her eyes slid past Zara, as if she were part of the pool equipment. "The water looks amazing for photos." Zara gathered her cleaning supplies, preparing to disappear before the guests arrived. As she headed toward the service entrance, she passed Tommy again. He sat alone now, watching the pool with the same expression she used to have before swim meets. A mixture of excitement and longing. "The water's extra clean today," she found herself saying. Tommy's head jerked up, surprised someone was talking to him. A smile spread across his face. "Did you clean it?" "Every morning." "Were you a swimmer?" "I see you sometimes." The way you move around the pool. Like you know it? Zara hesitated. I used to be. I wish I could swim, Tommy said quietly. Everyone says it's too dangerous with my CP. Before Zara could respond, Mrs. Peterson's voice cut through the air. The guests will be arriving soon. All service staff need to clear the area immediately. I have to go, Zara said, grabbing her bucket. Will you be here later? Tommy called after her. She nodded, already walking away. I'm on duty until the reception ends. In the staff room, Zara changed into her event uniform, black pants and a white button-down shirt. The other workers rushed around her, adjusting their clothes and trading shifts. Someone had turned on the small TV in the corner, playing the local news. Another rent increase expected in downtown Los Angeles, the reporter announced. Residents expressed concerns about. Someone changed the channel. Zara's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her old teammate, Maria. State championships next month. Coach still asks about you. She shoved the phone back in her pocket without responding. Through the staff room window, she could see the first wedding guests arriving, their expensive cars gleaming in the sunlight. Women in designer dresses minced across the lawn in high heels. Men in tailored suits adjusted their cufflinks. The sound of music drifted in. The ceremony was about to begin. Zara picked up her serving tray and straightened her collar. Time to become invisible again. But as she headed out to join the other servers, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. For a moment, she saw herself as she used to be, cap on, goggles in place, ready to dive into the water that had once promised her everything. The voice of Mrs. Peterson shattered the image, places everyone. And remember, we're here to serve, not to be seen. Zara took her position by the pool, tray held high, face carefully blank. The water rippled beside her, catching the late afternoon sun, while the wedding march began to play. The wedding reception pulsed with life around the pool. String lights twinkled overhead, their reflection dancing on the water's surface. Zara moved between clusters of guests, her serving tray balanced carefully as the sun began to set over Beverly Hills. Champagne, sir? She asked, approaching a group of men in expensive suits. They grabbed glasses without looking at her, continuing their conversation about stock portfolios. The smell of grilled seafood wafted from the catering station. Zara's stomach growled. Her peanut butter sandwich felt like ages ago. She'd been on her feet for 12 hours straight. Hey, you? Zara turned. A woman in a red dress was snapping her fingers. There's a spill by the bar. Clean it up. I'll get someone from cleaning right away, ma'am, Zara replied. No, you do it. Now. Zara bit her tongue and set down her tray. As she walked to get cleaning supplies, she passed the pool. The water looked black now in the growing darkness, the underwater lights creating an ethereal glow. The sight triggered a memory. Her last swim meet, 14 months ago. The smell of chlorine, the buzz of the crowd, her muscles coiled tight before the starting buzzer. Focus on the now, she muttered to herself, grabbing paper towels from the service station. When she returned to clean the spill, Tommy Winters was nearby in his wheelchair, watching the dancers. His face lit up when he saw her. Did you see the ceremony? He asked as she knelt to wipe the floor. I was working, Zara replied, scrubbing at the sticky champagne. Sarah looked like a princess. Dad cried, but he's trying to pretend he didn't. Zara smiled despite herself. She'd noticed Mr. Winters discreetly wiping his eyes during the vows. The pool looks different at night, Tommy continued, wheeling closer. Like a giant mirror, a woman in an expensive gown stumbled past them, nearly stepping on Zara's hand. Watch it, she slurred, champagne sloshing in her glass. Tommy frowned. They shouldn't talk to you like that. It's fine, Zara said, standing up. I'm used to it. That doesn't make it right. Before she could respond, Mrs. Winters appeared behind Tommy's wheelchair. Her makeup was perfect despite the hours of crying and laughing. There you are, sweetheart, she said to Tommy. Are you bothering the staff? We were just talking about the pool, Tommy explained. Mrs. Winters glanced at Zara, really looking at her for the first time. You're the one who cleans it every morning, aren't you? Yes, ma'am. Tommy's always watching you work. He's fascinated by swimming, but... She trailed off, her hand tightening on the wheelchair handle. I used to compete, Zara found herself saying. Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow. Really? Where? State level. Freestyle and butterfly. But not anymore? Zara's phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably her mom texting about another late shift. No, ma'am. Not anymore. Mrs. Peterson's voice cut through the crowd. Back to your stations, please. I should go, Zara said quickly, grabbing her cleaning supplies. As she walked away, she heard Tommy ask his mother, why did she stop swimming? The night wore on. Zara's feet ached in her work shoes, and her white shirt was stained with various spills. The party showed no signs of slowing down. The DJ had switched to upbeat dance music, and the alcohol flowed freely. She was clearing glasses from the poolside tables when she overheard two guests talking. Can you believe the Winters hired service staff from downtown? A woman in a designer dress whispered to her friend. I mean, you never know with those people. Well, they're cheaper, I suppose, her friend replied with a shrug. Zara's hands shook as she stacked the dirty glasses. She thought of her mother, probably serving drinks to similar people in her second job across town. The same people who'd look right through her, treating her like she was invisible. The memory of her mother's collapse hit her again. The apartment floor had been cold when Zara found her, still in her black server's dress, breathing shallow. They'd waited 3 hours in the emergency room before a doctor saw them. Hey, a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Tommy again, his wheelchair parked near the pool's edge. Are you okay? You look sad. I'm fine, Zara said automatically. Do you need something? No, the party's kind of boring. Everyone's drunk and loud. She understood. The music had reached an almost painful volume, and most of the guests were stumbling around the pool area, drinks in hand. Be careful near the edge, she warned, noticing how close his wheelchair was to the water. I won't fall in, Tommy said, but he backed up slightly. Did you like it? Swimming in competitions? Zara paused in her cleaning. More than anything, what does it feel like? Being in the water. She looked at the pool, remembering, like freedom, like nothing can hold you back. I wish. Tommy started, then stopped himself. Mom and Dad say it's too risky. Because of my muscles. There's adaptive swimming, Zara said. Special programs for Thomas. Mr. Winters' voice boomed across the terrace. Time for your medication, son. Tommy sighed. I have to go. Thanks for talking to me. Most people don't. As he wheeled away, Zara watched the water ripple from a sudden breeze. Her muscles remembered the feeling. The push off the wall, the glide through clean water, the burn in her lungs as she powered through another lap. Her phone buzzed again. This time she checked it. Rent's going up, $400 next month. We'll figure something out. Don't worry. Love, Mom. Zara's throat tightened. $400 might as well be for a million. Her mother already worked 60 hours a week. The medical bills from her collapse were still coming in. The party grew rowdier as midnight approached. Drunk guests stumbled dangerously close to the pool's edge. Servers rushed around with coffee and water, trying to prevent disasters. All hands on deck. Mrs. Peterson called out. We need more ice at the bars and someone to clean up the broken glass by the dance floor. Zara grabbed a broom and dustpan. As she swept up the shards of glass, she caught her reflection in a window. Her hair was coming loose from its practical bun, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked exactly like her mother had before the collapse. The DJ announced the last dance. Couples crowded the dance floor, while others lounged around the pool, drinking and laughing. Tommy had returned, watching the water with undisguised longing. A burst of laughter drew Zara's attention to a group of young guests gathering near the deep end. They were playing some kind of drinking game, pushing and shoving each other playfully. Maybe you should move back from the edge, she called out, but her voice was lost in the music. The night air grew heavy with humidity. Heat lightning flickered in the distance, promising a storm. Zara's shirt stuck to her back as she continued serving, cleaning, remaining invisible. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The water seemed to whisper warnings as drunk guests stumbled closer and closer to its edge. Tommy's wheelchair inched forward, drawn by the pool's glow. The DJ switched to a faster song. The crowd around the pool grew larger, louder, more chaotic. And then Zara heard it, the first scream that would change everything. The scream pierced through the music, sharp and terrified. Zara's head snapped toward the pool. For a split second, everything moved in slow motion. Tommy's empty wheelchair teetered at the pool's edge. His small body thrashed in the deep end, arms flailing against the dark water. "Oh my God!" The boy fell in. "Someone help him. Call 911. The crowd erupted in chaos. Guests rushed to the pool's edge, screaming and pointing. No one moved to help. The DJ cut the music, leaving only the sounds of splashing and panicked voices. Zara's body moved before her mind could catch up. She kicked off her work shoes and ran toward the pool. "Wait!" Mrs. Peterson grabbed her arm. The security team, Zara yanked free. She could see Tommy's head disappearing under the water. Security would take too long. "He has cerebral palsy." Mrs. Winters' scream cut through the chaos. "He can't swim." Zara reached the pool's edge. Tommy surfaced briefly, gasping. His eyes met hers, wide, terrified, pleading. Then he went under again. She dove. The cold water shocked her system. Her work uniform dragged her down, the fabric becoming lead weights around her limbs. Chlorine burned her eyes as she forced them open, searching the illuminated depths. There, a pale shape descending slowly toward the bottom. Zara kicked hard, fighting against her waterlogged clothes. Her lungs burned. The pool lights cast eerie shadows, making Tommy seem further away than he was. She could hear muffled screams from above the surface. She'll never reach him. Where are the security guards? Someone call an ambulance. The voices faded as she pushed deeper. Her old coach's training drills kicked in. Streamlined position, powerful kicks, conservation of oxygen. But this wasn't a practice run. This was life and death. Tommy's body hung, suspended in the water, unnaturally still. His dark hair waved like seaweed around his face. His eyes were closed. Zara's chest tightened with the need to breathe. Just a few more feet. The heavy uniform threatened to pull her back to the surface, but she fought against it. Her fingers brushed Tommy's arm, then caught hold. "Got him." She pulled him close, wrapping one arm around his chest. His body was completely limp. Using every ounce of strength left, she kicked toward the surface. They seemed to rise in slow motion. Her vision began to darken at the edges. The weight of two bodies and the waterlogged uniform made each kick feel like moving through concrete. "Come on," she thought desperately. "Come on." Her lungs screamed for air. Tommy felt like a dead weight in her arms. The surface seemed impossibly far away. Then, breakthrough. Zara gasped as they broke through, sucking in precious oxygen. The crowd screams came rushing back at full volume. Tommy remained unconscious in her arms. "Help," she shouted, struggling to keep both their heads above water. "I need help at the edge." Mr. Winters appeared at the pool's edge, reaching for his son. Other hands extended down to help. Zara pushed Tommy's body up as the others pulled. She saw Mrs. Winters collapse to her knees beside him as they laid him on the concrete. Zara pulled herself out of the pool, water cascading from her ruined uniform. Her arms shook with exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. "He's not breathing," Mrs. Winters sobbed. Zara pushed through the crowd surrounding Tommy. Her first aid training from swim team kicked in. She dropped to her knees beside him, checking for a pulse. It was there, but weak. "Give me space," she ordered, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. The crowd stepped back. Zara tilted Tommy's head back, pinched his nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths. His chest rose slightly. She began compressions, counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Someone in the crowd was praying. Mrs. Winters gripped her husband's arm, so tight her knuckles were white. Sirens wailed in the distance. "Come on, Tommy," Zara whispered between compressions. "Come on." More rescue breaths. More compressions. The concrete scraped her knees through her soaked pants. Her arms burned. Then a cough. Water spurted from Tommy's mouth as he began to choke and gasp. Zara quickly turned him on his side, helping the water drain. His eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. "Mom," he croaked. Mrs. Winters burst into tears. Gathering him into her arms, Mr. Winters wrapped them both in an embrace, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Zara sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how cold she was in her drenched clothes. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving her trembling. Paramedics burst through the crowd, equipment in hand. They gently moved the Winters aside to examine Tommy. Zara watched as they checked his vitals, asked him questions, tested his responses. "You're the one who pulled him out?" one paramedic asked her. She nodded, teeth chattering, quick thinking with the rescue breaths. "You probably saved his life." The words didn't feel real. Nothing felt real. The crowd of party guests stared at her with new eyes, no longer invisible, but she wasn't sure what she was to them now. "Let's get him to the hospital for a full check," the paramedic announced. "Who's riding with him?" "I am," Mrs. Winters said immediately. She turned to Zara. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You?" But she seemed unable to find words. Mr. Winters stepped forward, his face raw with emotion. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Thank you." Zara could only nod. She watched as they loaded Tommy onto a stretcher. He reached out and caught her hand as they passed. "You were right," he whispered. "It does feel like freedom." Then they were gone, the ambulance sirens fading into the night. The party guests began to disperse, speaking in hushed voices. The near tragedy had sobered them quickly. Mrs. Peterson appeared with a blanket, wrapping it around Zara's shoulders. "Go home," she said quietly. "We'll handle things here." Zara's legs felt like rubber as she made her way to the staff room. Her phone had survived in its waterproof case. 3 missed calls from her mom. She changed into her spare clothes with shaking hands. In the mirror, her reflection looked like a stranger, hair plastered to her head, eyes wide and shocked. The drive home was a blur. Los Angeles streaked past her bus window in smears of neon and streetlights. Her body ached as if she'd swum 100 races. Her mom was asleep when she got home, still in her waitress uniform. Zara draped a blanket over her, then sat on the edge of their worn couch. The events of the night played on repeat in her mind. The scream, the cold water, Tommy's still face, the desperate race to the surface. Her muscles remembered every moment, every stroke, every second where it could have gone wrong. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, dawn light was creeping through their apartment windows. Her mom stood over her, concern etched on her tired face. "Baby, why are you sleeping out here? And why is your hair wet?" Zara opened her mouth to explain, but a knock at the door interrupted her. Through the peephole, she saw a black car parked outside their building. Mr. Winters stood on their doorstep, his expensive suit replaced by casual clothes. His face was haggard from a sleepless night. "We need to talk," he said. The world narrowed to water and silence. Zara's lungs burned as she pushed deeper into the pool's depths. Tommy's unconscious form drifted below her, his limbs moving with the gentle current of the pool's filtration system. Her waterlogged uniform dragged at her limbs, fighting every movement. Time stretched like pulled taffy. Each kick seemed to take forever. The pool lights cast strange shadows, making distances deceptive. Was Tommy getting closer or further away? Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Not enough air, her brain screamed. Surface. Need air. She ignored it. Tommy's face had taken on a bluish tint in the underwater light. His hair floated around his head like a dark halo. His eyes remained closed, face peaceful, too peaceful. A memory flashed, her old coach demonstrating rescue techniques. When someone's drowning, you've got seconds, not minutes. After 4 minutes without oxygen, brain damage starts. After 6, she hadn't checked her phone when she dove in. How long had Tommy been under before she reached him? How many precious seconds had ticked by while the party guests stood frozen? Her chest felt like it would explode. Every cell in her body begged for oxygen. The weight of her clothes tried to pull her back up, but she fought against it. Just a little further, just a little deeper. Above, the surface of the pool rippled, distorting the faces of the crowd gathered around the edge. Their screams reached her as if through layers of cotton. "She'll never make it. The boy's been under too long. Someone call 911. "Where's security?" Zara stretched out her arm. Her fingers brushed Tommy's shirt, then slipped off. The chlorine stung her eyes, but she forced them to stay open. The world had reduced to this. Reach, kick, ignore the burning in her lungs. This time, her hand caught his arm. She pulled him close, wrapping her arm across his chest like she'd been taught. His body was completely limp. A dead weight in her arms. Now came the hard part. Zara kicked hard, trying to propel them both upward. It was like swimming through molasses. Her clothes felt like they were made of lead. Tommy's unconscious form dragged at her arms. Each kick seemed to move them inches instead of feet. The surface tantalized above them, shimmering and impossibly far away. Her vision began to tunnel. The black spots were getting bigger. Her muscles screamed in protest. Just a little more, she thought. But was she even moving anymore? The water pressed in from all sides. Her kicks grew weaker. In that moment, underwater with a dying boy in her arms, Zara faced a choice. Her body was shutting down. She could let go, save herself, try again with help. No one would blame her. She'd already done more than anyone else. Tommy's face drifted in front of hers, peaceful and still, like her mother's face had been, lying on their apartment floor. No, something deep inside Zara hardened into steel. Her next kick was stronger, fueled by desperate determination. Another kick. Another. Her lungs were on fire. Her muscles felt like they were tearing apart. But they were moving. Slowly. Agonizingly, they rose through the water. The surface grew closer. 20 feet. 15. 10. Zara's vision had narrowed to a pinpoint. Her brain screamed for oxygen. Every instinct told her to let go, to save herself. 5 feet. Tommy's weight seemed to increase with each inch. Zara's movements became jerky, uncoordinated. The world started to go dark around the edges. Just as her body began to give out, they broke through. Air rushed into Zara's lungs like knives. She gasped and choked, struggling to keep Tommy's face above water. The night air felt freezing against her wet skin. Sound crashed back in at full volume. Screams, shouts, crying. Help! She managed to call out, her voice raw. I need help at the edge. Hands reached down from above. Mr. Winters' face appeared, distorted by tears and pool water. Others crowded around him. Waiters, guests, security guards who had arrived too late. Zara used the last of her strength to push Tommy's body upward as they pulled. Her arms felt like rubber. Water streamed from her uniform, adding more weight. She caught glimpses through the chaos. Tommy's body being lifted onto the concrete. Mrs. Winters collapsing beside him. The crowd pressing in. Someone reached down to help her out. Her legs wouldn't work properly. She scraped her knees, dragging herself onto the pool deck, leaving trails of water mixed with blood from the rough concrete. But there was no time to rest. No time to feel the pain or exhaustion. Tommy wasn't breathing. Zara pushed through the crowd on trembling legs. Her first aid training clicked into place like puzzle pieces. Check for pulse, clear airway, begin rescue breaths. Give me space, she ordered, surprised by the authority in her voice. The crowd stepped back. Tommy's skin felt cold under her hands. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and sealed her mouth over his. 2 rescue breaths. His chest rose slightly. Come on, Tommy, she whispered, beginning compressions. Don't give up now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rhythm of CPR became her whole world. Everything else faded. The murmuring crowd, the sound of approaching sirens, her own exhaustion and pain. More rescue breaths. More compressions. Her arms shook with fatigue. Water dripped from her hair onto Tommy's face. Someone was crying. Someone else was praying. Then a cough. A sputter. Water spewed from Tommy's mouth as his body convulsed. Turn him on his side, a voice called out. Paramedic? Guest? Zara couldn't tell anymore. She helped roll Tommy into recovery position, supporting his head as he vomited pool water. His eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. Mom? The world exploded into motion again. Mrs. Winters swept in. Gathering Tommy into her arms, paramedics appeared with equipment and questions. The crowd pressed closer, then back, then closer again. Zara sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how badly she was shaking. Her uniform clung to her skin, cold and heavy. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. She could still feel the weight of the water pressing in from all sides. You're the one who got him out? A paramedic knelt beside her, checking her over with professional efficiency. Zara nodded, teeth chattering. That was incredibly brave and incredibly dangerous. The paramedic wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. You could have drowned too. I used to swim, Zara said. Her voice sounded strange in her ears. Competitive. Lucky for that, boy, you did. Lucky. Was it luck? Or was it something else? Something that had been waiting for this moment, like a muscle memory that never really faded? They loaded Tommy into the ambulance, his parents climbing in after him. Mr. Winters paused before the doors closed, looking back at Zara with an expression she couldn't read. Thank you, he said simply. Then they were gone, sirens wailing into the night. The party guests began to disperse, their expensive clothes and jewelry catching the pool lights as they hurried to their cars. Their excited chatter floated back. Did you see? The cleaning girl could have died. So brave. Zara stayed where she was, wrapped in the blanket, watching the ripples in the pool slowly calm. Her body felt like it had been beaten. Every breath brought a new ache. But underneath the pain and exhaustion, something else stirred. A feeling she thought she'd lost forever when she quit swimming. A sense of purpose, of knowing exactly what she was meant to do. Mrs. Peterson appeared at her side, holding out a set of dry clothes. Go home, she said quietly. Get some rest. But Zara, she paused, choosing her words carefully. What you did tonight, that wasn't the action of someone meant to spend their life cleaning pools. Zara looked up at her, then back at the now calm water. In its surface, she saw two reflections. The invisible girl she'd been at the start of the night, and someone else, someone stronger, braver, more real. The question was, which reflection would she choose to be tomorrow? Mr. Winters stood in the doorway of Zara's apartment, his expensive watch catching the early morning light. The hallway's fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, highlighting the dark circles under his eyes. May I come in? He asked. Zara's mother stepped forward, still in her waitress uniform from last night's shift. I'm sorry, but who are you? Richard Winters. He extended his hand. Your daughter saved my son's life last night. Her mother's eyes widened, turning to Zara. What? Please, Mr. Winters said. Let me explain. They led him into their small living room. He sat on their worn couch, looking out of place in his casual but clearly expensive clothes. Through the thin walls, they could hear the neighbor's TV and a baby crying somewhere down the hall. Tommy is stable, he said without preamble. The doctors want to keep him for observation, but they say there should be no lasting damage. He looked directly at Zara. Thanks to you. Zara's muscles still ached from the rescue. She'd barely slept, the events playing on repeat in her mind. How did he fall in? She asked. Mr. Winters ran a hand through his graying hair. He wheeled too close to the edge. The chair tipped. It happened so fast. His voice cracked. Everyone just stood there. Everyone except you. Is that true? Zara's mother asked, gripping the back of a kitchen chair. You jumped in? She didn't just jump in, Mr. Winters said. She performed a professional rescue. CPR. Everything. He leaned forward. Which brings me to why I'm here. You used to swim competitively, didn't you? Zara nodded. State level, her mother added with a hint of pride. Until we couldn't afford it anymore, Zara finished. Mr. Winters nodded slowly. My wife and I spent most of the night talking. About Tommy. About you. About what could have happened if you hadn't been there. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. We want to help. Zara's mother stiffened. We don't need charity. This isn't charity, Mr. Winters said firmly. This is an investment in someone who proved themselves extraordinary. He placed the envelope on their coffee table. It's a contract, actually, for a full swimming scholarship at Western Academy, plus living expenses. The room went silent except for the humming refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Western Academy? Zara's voice came out barely above a whisper. It was one of the most prestigious private schools in Los Angeles, with an elite swimming program. Their coach watched the security footage of the rescue. He says your technique, even in a crisis, shows exceptional talent. Mr. Winters smiled slightly. He wants you on the team? Zara's mother picked up the envelope with trembling hands. We can't possibly. There's more, Mr. Winters continued. I understand you work 2 jobs? Her mother nodded. I own a property management company. We need someone to oversee tenant relations for our downtown buildings. Better hours, better pay, full benefits. He looked at Zara, including a corporate apartment in the building of your choice. Tears welled in her mother's eyes. Why? Because your daughter didn't just save my son. She showed us something we'd forgotten in our world of privilege. What real courage looks like. He stood up. The offer is yours, no strings attached. But I hope you'll accept. Zara's mind raced. Swimming again. A real school. No more cleaning pools. No more watching her mother work herself to exhaustion. Can I think about it? She asked. Mr. Winters looked surprised. Of course. But can I ask why you need to? Zara stood and walked to their small window. The morning sun caught the drops of dew on the fire escape. Last night, in the pool, she said slowly, everything became clear. All the training, all the hours in the water, it wasn't just about winning medals. It was about being ready for moments that matter. She turned back to face them. If I accept, I need to know it's not just about swimming fast. I want to teach others, kids like Tommy, who think the water isn't for them. Mr. Winters was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile that reached his tired eyes. I think we can arrange that, he said. In fact, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Sarah? Yes, he's fine. Listen, remember that adaptive swimming program you wanted to start at the community center? I think I found your instructor. Zara's mother came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. You really saved him, she whispered. Zara nodded, remembering the weight of Tommy in her arms, the burning in her lungs, the desperate kick toward the surface. I had to, she said simply. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Mr. Winters' assistant arrived with more documents, a laptop, and a stack of brochures for Western Academy. The scholarship papers required signatures. The job offer for her mother needed reviewing. Around noon, Zara's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hey, it's Tommy. Dad gave me your number. Can you visit? Hospital food sucks. She looked up at Mr. Winters, who was discussing benefit packages with her mother. Can I? She started to ask. He grabbed his car keys. I'll drive you. The hospital room was bright with sunlight. Tommy sat propped up in bed, his normally pale face flushed with color. His eyes lit up when Zara walked in. My hero, he called out. Don't try to talk too much, Mrs. Winters warned from her chair beside the bed. She stood and hugged Zara tightly. Thank you. Thank you. Tommy rolled his eyes. Mom's been crying every 5 minutes. You nearly died, Mrs. Winters said, wiping her eyes. I'm allowed. But I didn't, Tommy said. Because Zara was there? He looked at her curiously. Were you scared? Zara thought about it. Not until after. There wasn't time to be scared. I felt it, Tommy said quietly. When you grabbed me. Like nothing could go wrong because you knew exactly what to do. Mrs. Winters touched Zara's arm. Richard told me about the scholarship. About the teaching program. I haven't decided yet, Zara started to say. Yes, you have, Tommy interrupted. I saw your face in the pool. When you're in the water, you become who you're really supposed to be. A doctor came in then, followed by a physical therapist. They talked about recovery times and rehabilitation. Tommy would need weeks of therapy to regain his strength. And no more pool until we figure out proper safety measures, the doctor added. Unless, Mrs. Winters said slowly, he had a qualified instructor. Someone trained in adaptive swimming techniques. She looked meaningfully at Zara. Mom? Tommy's voice was hopeful. Really? We'll need to discuss it with your specialists, Mrs. Winters said. But yes, really? Zara felt something settle in her chest. A certainty she hadn't felt since leaving competitive swimming. The rest of the day passed quickly. She met with the Western Academy swim coach, who talked about training schedules and upcoming meets. She toured the school's Olympic-sized pool, ran her fingers through the crystal-clear water. Her mother signed the job contract. They looked at apartments in one of Mr. Winters' newer buildings. Everything was happening so fast, yet it felt right. That evening, Zara stood in front of their bathroom mirror. Her muscles still ached from the rescue, but it was a good ache, like after a hard practice. She looked at herself and saw someone new. Not the invisible cleaning girl, not the former swimmer, but both and neither. Her phone buzzed with another text from Tommy. Dad says you start teaching next month. Fair warning. I'm going to be your most annoying student. Zara smiled and typed back, can't wait. She walked to their living room window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, a pool was waiting, not for medals or records, but for moments that mattered. For scared kids finding their courage. For second chances and new beginnings. The water was calling. This time, she was ready to answer. The next morning, Zara's muscles screamed in protest as she walked through the doors of Western Academy. The familiar smell of chlorine hit her nose, making her heart race. Coach Martinez waited by the Olympic-sized pool, his arms crossed over his chest. Show me what you've got, he said without preamble. Zara dropped her bag on a nearby bench. I haven't trained in over a year. Don't care. Into the water. Let's see this technique that saved the Winters boy. She changed into the borrowed practice suit in the locker room, the material feeling strange against her skin after so long. The pool stretched before her, lanes marked by floating dividers, water still and perfect in the morning light. Start with a 400-meter freestyle, Coach Martinez called out. Show me your form. Zara stepped onto the starting block. Her body remembered the position, feet shoulder-width apart, toes curled over the edge, knees slightly bent. She took a deep breath and dove. The water welcomed her like an old friend. Her muscles might be out of practice, but they hadn't forgotten. Each stroke felt natural, each kick powerful. She cut through the water with minimal splash, her breathing controlled and rhythmic. After 4 laps, she touched the wall and looked up. Coach Martinez hadn't moved, but his expression had changed. Again, he said, this time, butterfly. She pushed off the wall and began the more demanding stroke. Her shoulders protested, still sore from the rescue, but she pushed through. The butterfly had always been her strongest event. When she finished, Coach Martinez finally smiled. The Winters boy was lucky, he said, not just because you were there, but because you remembered your training under pressure. He sat on the edge of the pool. Tell me what happened. Every detail. Zara pulled herself out of the water, water streaming from her borrowed suit. I didn't think, she said. I just moved. The training kicked in, approach from behind, secure hold across the chest, keep their head above water. And the CPRs? Same thing. The motions were automatic. Count compressions, watch chest rise, maintain airway. Coach Martinez nodded. Muscle memory. That's why we drill until it's second nature. He stood up. Practice starts Monday, 5 a.m. Don't be late. Coach, Zara called as he turned to leave. I want to learn adaptive swimming techniques. For kids like Tommy, he paused. That's a specialized certification. Takes extra training. I'll do whatever it takes. I know you will. He smiled again. That's why I already signed you up for the course. Later that morning, Zara sat in the hospital cafeteria with Tommy, who was finally allowed solid food. He attacked his breakfast with enthusiasm while she picked at a muffin. So, you're really going to teach swimming? He asked between bites. That's the plan. Once I get certified, even to kids like me. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Especially to kids like you. Tommy was quiet for a moment. The doctors always said swimming would be too dangerous. Because of my muscle control, they were wrong. Zara leaned forward. Water can support you in ways land can't. With the right techniques, the right safety measures, anyone can experience the freedom of swimming. Freedom, Tommy repeated softly. That's what it felt like for a second before I got scared. Like I was floating, but also in control. Mrs. Winters appeared in the doorway, looking more rested than the day before. Physical therapy in 10 minutes, she reminded Tommy. She turned to Zara. Will you stay? The therapist wants to discuss potential water exercises. The physical therapy room was bright and modern. Dr. Chun, the therapist, listened intently as Zara described adaptive swimming techniques she'd researched. The buoyancy of water could actually help his muscle development, she explained. And with proper support and training. I agree, Dr. Chun said, but we'll need to proceed carefully. Build strength gradually. Tommy beamed from his wheelchair. When can we start? Not until you're fully recovered, his mother said firmly. And not until I'm certified, Zara added. Later that afternoon, Zara returned to the Winters mansion to collect her things from the staff room. The pool area had been cleaned up, all evidence of the wedding and near tragedy erased. But the water seemed different now, not just a luxury for the wealthy, but a space of possibility. Mrs. Peterson met her at the service entrance. "The other staff members want to see you," she said. In the break room, the cleaning crew, servers, and maintenance workers gathered. Many had witnessed the rescue. "We took up a collection," Maria, one of the servers, said. "For your swimming gear?" She handed Zara an envelope. "I can't accept." "Yes, you can," Mrs. Peterson interrupted. "Consider it an investment in our hero." That evening, Zara and her mother toured their potential new apartment in Mr. Winters' building. The two-bedroom unit was on the 15th floor, with views of the city and a secure parking space. "It's too much," her mother whispered. "Mr. Winters says it's standard for management positions," Zara reminded her. They stood at the window, watching the sunset paint the city gold. Their reflection in the glass showed two women standing tall, no longer bent by the weight of just surviving. "I'm proud of you," her mother said suddenly. "Not just for saving that boy, for knowing who you are and what you're meant to do." Zara's phone buzzed with a text from Coach Martinez. "Pool's open late if you want to get a head start. Keys under the mat." She looked at her mother. "Want to watch me practice?" The Western Academy pool was eerily quiet at night. Their footsteps echoed off the high ceiling as they walked to the water's edge. "I remember your first swim meet," her mother said. "You were so small, but so determined." Zara stripped down to her practice suit and stepped onto the starting block. "Time me?" Her mother picked up the stopwatch from the coach's chair. "Go!" Zara dove. The water embraced her, cool and familiar. Each stroke felt stronger than the last. Her muscles remembered this dance. The pull, the kick, the rhythm of breathing. Length after length, she cut through the water. No pressure, no competition, just the pure joy of movement. When she finally touched the wall and looked up, her mother was crying. "Why are you crying?" "Because," her mother wiped her eyes, "you're swimming like you used to. Like nothing can hold you back." Later that night, Zara lay in bed, her muscles pleasantly tired. Her phone lit up with one last text from Tommy. "Dad says construction starts next week on the Adaptive Swimming Center. You better be ready for your first student." She smiled and typed back, "Get stronger. The water's waiting." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Training, certification courses, moving to a new home. But for now, she closed her eyes and let herself float in the certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. The dream that had died in the chlorinated waters of her old community pool had been reborn in a moment of crisis. Not just as a personal achievement, but as a way to help others find their own strength in the water. Sometimes, she realized, you have to sink before you can truly learn to swim. The TV buzzed with early morning news as Zara poured her coffee. Her arms still ached from yesterday's rescue, muscles she hadn't used in months protesting every movement. "Breaking news from Beverly Hills," the anchor announced. A near tragedy at a high-profile wedding was averted when a teenage staff member rescued. Zara's mother snatched the remote and turned off the TV. "They're talking about you." "They shouldn't be." Zara stared into her coffee cup. "I just did what needed to be done." Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Old teammates from her swimming days, former coaches, even local news stations wanting interviews. She'd ignored them all. A knock at the door made them both jump. Through the peephole, Zara saw reporters gathered in the hallway, cameras and microphones ready. "How did they find us?" her mother whispered. Another knock, this time at their kitchen window. Zara pulled back the curtain to see Mr. Winters on the fire escape, looking apologetic. "Sorry for the dramatic entrance," he said as they let him in. "The press is everywhere. Mind if I come in this way?" He carried a leather briefcase and looked far more put together than he had the previous night at the hospital. "How's Tommy?" Zara asked immediately. "Better. Asking for you, actually." Mr. Winters set his briefcase on their small kitchen table. "But first, we need to deal with this situation. The press, everything." He pulled out a stack of papers. "The media attention, the job offers that are about to flood in, the scholarship details. We need to do this right." Zara's mother put on another pot of coffee. "Job offers? Several swim schools have already called my office. They saw the security footage. He spread the papers across the table. But I have a different proposal. The morning sun filtered through their dusty kitchen window as Mr. Winters outlined his plan. A full scholarship to Western Academy. A coaching certification program. A position at a new adaptive swimming center he wanted to build. Tommy's accident made me realize something, he explained. There are probably hundreds of kids like him who could benefit from swimming, but don't have access to proper facilities or trained instructors. Zara's mother studied the paperwork. This is a lot. It's an investment, Mr. Winters corrected, in someone who's proven their worth. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Through the door, they heard reporters interviewing their neighbors. Did you know the hero swimmer? How long has she lived here? Any comment on her background? Mr. Winters pulled out his phone. I can have security here in 10 minutes. Clear them out. No, Zara said suddenly. Both adults looked at her. I want to talk to them. Are you sure? Her mother asked. Zara nodded. But not about me. About Tommy. About kids like him who deserve a chance to feel free in the water. Mr. Winters smiled slowly. You're already thinking like a teacher. The next hour was a blur of camera flashes and microphones. Zara stood in their narrow hallway, answering questions with a focus that surprised even her. I'm not the story, she told reporter after reporter. The story is about access. About giving every child, regardless of their physical challenges, the chance to experience the freedom of swimming. And what about your competitive career? Someone asked. That chapter's closed, Zara replied. I'm starting a new one. By noon, the reporters had dispersed, armed with a different angle than they'd expected. Mr. Winters looked impressed. You handled that perfectly, he said. But now we need to talk logistics. They spent the afternoon going over details. The scholarship would cover everything: tuition, books, swimming gear. The new adaptive swimming center would take months to build. But in the meantime, Zara could start her certification courses. What about living expenses? Her mother asked, still worried about the practical side. All covered, Mr. Winters assured her, including a corporate apartment near the school. And about your new position? He outlined her mother's role in his company, overseeing tenant relations for his downtown properties. Better hours, full benefits, and a salary that made her eyes water. Why are you doing all this? Zara's mother finally asked. Mr. Winters was quiet for a moment. When Tommy was born with cerebral palsy, doctors told us all the things he'd never do. Swimming was top of the list. He looked at Zara. But yesterday, for a few seconds before he fell, he felt what it was like to move freely. Your daughter didn't just save his life. She showed us what's possible. Zara's phone buzzed again. This time it was Tommy. Saw you on TV. Way to make it about the important stuff. When do we start lessons? She smiled and typed back. As soon as you're cleared by doctors. And I'm certified. Better hurry up then. I've got a pool with my name on it. The afternoon brought more visitors. Coach Martinez from Western Academy arrived with training schedules and equipment lists. Representatives from the Adaptive Swimming Association came to discuss certification requirements. Through it all, Zara felt a growing certainty. This wasn't just about second chances or redemption. It was about transformation, turning a moment of crisis into a lifetime of purpose. There's one more thing, Mr. Winters said as the day wound down. The press will eventually dig into your background. Your mother's medical bills, the financial struggles. Let them, Zara said firmly. Maybe it'll help people understand why programs like this matter. Her mother touched her arm. When did you get so wise? Probably around the same time I realized that saving someone's life isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning. That evening, after everyone had left, Zara stood at their kitchen window watching the sunset. Their small apartment suddenly felt different. Not like the prison of poverty it had been, but like a chrysalis they were about to leave behind. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Winters. Tommy's asking if you'll come to his physical therapy session tomorrow. The therapist wants to discuss water exercises. Another text followed quickly. Also, the contractors need input on the adaptive swimming center design. Any thoughts? Zara looked at her mother, who was reading through her new employment contract with happy disbelief. Mom, want to go look at pools tomorrow? Her mother smiled. Lead the way, sweetheart. You seem to know exactly where you're going. Later that night, unable to sleep, Zara opened her laptop and began researching adaptive swimming techniques. The screen filled with images of children in the water, supported by various devices, their faces bright with joy. She thought of Tommy's words about feeling free for those few seconds, about all the other kids who deserved to feel that freedom, about the power of water to transform not just bodies but lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, training sessions, certification studies, building plans to review. But for now, she let herself feel the weight of the change happening, not just in her life, but in the ripples spreading outward from one desperate moment in a Beverly Hills pool. Her phone lit up one last time. A message from Coach Martinez. 5 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. We got work to do. Zara set her alarm without hesitation. The water was waiting, and this time, she wasn't just diving in for herself. Zara stood at the service entrance of the Winters mansion, her hand hesitating over the doorknob. 1 week had passed since the rescue. This time, she wasn't here to clean pools. You can use the front door, you know, Tommy's voice called from behind her. He wheeled down the driveway, his physical therapist walking beside him. Old habits, Zara said, turning around. How was therapy? Brutal. Tommy grinned. But Dr. Chin says I might be ready for the pool next week. The physical therapist nodded. His strength is improving faster than expected. The motivation helps. They walked through the main entrance together, Zara feeling strange about walking through the grand foyer instead of sneaking through service corridors. The house looked different from this angle, less intimidating, more like a home. Mrs. Winters met them in the kitchen. She was dressed casually, a far cry from her usual elegant attire. Perfect timing, she said. The contractors are here to discuss the swimming center plans. The dining room table was covered in blueprints. Mr. Winters stood with 3 men in construction gear, pointing at different sections of the drawings. Ah, Zara, he said, looking up. We need your expertise here. What do you think about the pool depth variations? For the next hour, they discussed technical details. Ramp angles, lift mechanisms, water temperature control. Zara found herself drawing on both her swimming experience and her recent research into adaptive techniques. The shallow end needs to be warmer, she explained. It helps with muscle relaxation for kids with CP and similar conditions. Tommy wheeled closer to look at the plans. Will I really be able to use all of this? That's the point, Zara said. You'll be our test subject. The contractors left with pages of notes. Mrs. Winters ordered lunch for everyone, and they ate in the kitchen. Another first for Zara, who was used to hurried breaks in the staff room. Your mother started work today, right? Mr. Winters asked between bites. Zara nodded. At the downtown office. She called earlier, excited about having her own desk. The tenants already love her, he said. She has a way of making people feel heard. After lunch, Tommy insisted on showing Zara the pool. The water gleamed in the afternoon sun, peaceful now, but the memory of that night still hung in the air. I'm not scared of it, Tommy said suddenly. Everyone thinks I should be, but I'm not. Good. Zara sat on the edge, letting her feet dangle in the water. Fear doesn't help in the water. Respect does. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water ripple in the breeze. Then Tommy asked, what was it like? When you were competing? Zara thought about it, like having a secret superpower. In the water, nothing else mattered. Not money, not background, just how hard you worked and how much you wanted it. And now it's different. Better, maybe. It's not about winning anymore. It's about showing others what's possible. Mrs. Peterson emerged from the house, stopping short when she saw Zara. Still feels strange, doesn't it, she said with a smile. Seeing you here as a guest? Everything feels strange lately, Zara admitted. Good strange, but strange. The afternoon brought more meetings. Coach Martinez arrived with training schedules and competition dates, though they all knew Zara's focus had shifted from competing to teaching. You'll still need to stay in top form, he insisted. Teaching adaptive swimming requires even more strength and skill than competition. They gathered in Mr. Winters' study to review the certification requirements. The course would take 6 months, involving both classroom work and practical training. I've arranged for you to shadow some current adaptive swimming instructors, Mr. Winters said. Starting next week, Tommy, who had insisted on joining the meeting, asked, Can I watch? You'll do more than watch, Zara told him. You'll help me learn. Every student is different, and you'll be my first. As the sun began to set, Zara's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. New apartment is amazing. Keys next week. Come see after your training tomorrow. Another message followed from Coach Martinez. 5 a.m. Don't forget your new gear. The gear had arrived that morning. Top-of-the-line practice suits, goggles, and training equipment, all paid for by the Winters family despite Zara's protests. I should head home, she said, standing up. Early practice tomorrow. Use the front door, Tommy called after her. Your family now. The words hit her hard. A week ago, she'd been invisible in this house. Now, Mr. Winters walked her out. At the door, he paused. You know, when we first offered all this, the scholarship, the swimming center, your mother's job, I thought we were the ones giving something. He smiled. I'm starting to think we're getting the better end of the deal. Zara looked back at the house, remembering how different it had looked from the service entrance. Sometimes, she said, you have to change your perspective to see things clearly. The drive home on the bus felt different too. She watched the city pass by, the contrast between Beverly Hills and downtown no longer feeling like an unbridgeable gap. Her mother was waiting up, still in her new work clothes, excited to share stories about her first day. One of the tenants cried, she said. Actually cried because I took the time to listen to her concerns. No one had ever done that before. Zara smiled. Feels good, doesn't it? Making a difference. Is that how it feels in the water? When you're teaching? I don't know yet, Zara admitted. But I'm excited to find out. That night, she reorganized her room, packing for their upcoming move. Her old swimming medals caught the light, remnants of a different dream, a different life. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from Tommy. Dad says construction starts Monday. Better get certified fast, teacher. She typed back, get stronger fast, student. Then, front door from now on. Promise. She lay in bed, listening to the city's sounds through her window. Tomorrow would bring another early morning, another step toward this new life. But for the first time, she wasn't swimming away from something. She was swimming toward it. The Western Academy pool echoed with splashing sounds and Tommy's laughter. 3 months had passed since the night of the rescue, and everything had changed. Keep your arms straight, Zara instructed, supporting Tommy's body in the shallow end. That's it. Feel how the water holds you. Tommy floated on his back, his usual muscle tension visibly relaxing in the warm water. It's like gravity doesn't exist. Exactly. Zara adjusted her grip on the support belt around his waist. Ready to try the leg movements we practiced? From the observation deck, Mr. and Mrs. Winters watched with Dr. Chun, Tommy's physical therapist. They'd all been skeptical at first, but the progress was undeniable. Small kicks, Zara encouraged. Remember, the water does most of the work. You just have to guide it. Tommy's legs moved slowly, fighting against his cerebral palsy, but finding new patterns in the water. Each kick sent ripples across the pool's surface. I'm doing it, he exclaimed. Mom, Dad, look, we see you, honey. Mrs. Winters called back, wiping tears from her eyes. Coach Martinez appeared at the pool's edge, clipboard in hand. Looking good, kid. Zara, your certification instructor, is here for your final evaluation. Zara helped Tommy to the pool's edge, where his father waited with a towel. Ready to show off what we've learned? Tommy grinned. Born ready, Ms. Rodriguez, the certification evaluator, sat with her assessment forms as Zara demonstrated the adaptive swimming techniques she'd mastered over the past months. Tommy played his part perfectly, showing how different support methods could help swimmers with various physical challenges. Your form is excellent, Ms. Rodriguez noted. But more importantly, your connection with your student is remarkable. He makes it easy, Zara said, helping Tommy with his flotation exercises. No, Tommy corrected. You make it possible. After the evaluation, Zara changed quickly in the locker room. Her mother would be arriving soon to see the new adaptive swimming center, now just days from its grand opening. The facility had transformed the old community pool where Zara used to train. Mr. Winters had bought the property and rebuilt it from the ground up, incorporating every modern adaptive swimming feature available. Her mother arrived just as Tommy was getting back into his wheelchair. Look who's all wet, she teased him. Look who's all professional, he shot back, eyeing her business suit. Zara's mother smoothed her jacket self-consciously. 3 months as property manager had given her a new confidence, along with a wardrobe that no longer included waitress uniforms. The Tenants Association sent these, she said, holding up a basket of pool toys. For the center's opening day, they toured the facility together. The warm water therapy pool, the adjustable depth training area, the state-of-the-art lift systems. Hard to believe this all started with a wedding, Tommy mused. And a very brave cleaning girl, his father added. Zara shook her head. It started long before that. With every kid who was told they couldn't swim, couldn't compete, couldn't feel free in the water. Mr. Winters checked his watch. Speaking of which, the reporters will be here soon. First interview about the center's opening. Remember, Mrs. Winters said, let Tommy and Zara do most of the talking. This is their story. The local news crew set up by the main pool. Tommy insisted on being interviewed in his swimsuit, proud to show off his progress. So what makes this facility special? The reporter asked. Everything, Tommy answered. The water temperature, the depth options, the support equipment. But mostly the people. Teachers who understand that everyone deserves to feel what it's like to swim. And you'll be the first student? I already am. He grinned at Zara. And I only almost drowned once. Tommy. His mother scolded, but everyone laughed. The reporter turned to Zara. What made you switch from competitive swimming to adaptive instruction? Zara looked at the water, remembering that night 3 months ago. Sometimes life shows you your real purpose, she said. I thought losing my chance at competition meant losing swimming forever. Instead, it led me here, where swimming isn't about winning medals, but about winning freedom. After the interviews, Coach Martinez pulled Zara aside. Your certification results came in. He handed her an envelope. You might want to open this with everyone here. Hands shaking slightly, Zara broke the seal. She read quickly, then looked up with tears in her eyes. I passed, she whispered. Top marks in both practical and theory. Tommy hooped from his wheelchair. Does this mean we can officially start real lessons? It means, Mr. Winters said, that the center's first certified instructor is ready for opening day. The next hour was a blur of congratulations and planning. The center would open in 3 days. 20 students were already enrolled, with more on a waiting list. We'll need to hire more instructors soon, Mrs. Winters noted. I know some people, Zara said, former teammates who might be interested in certification. Later, after everyone had left, Zara stayed behind to swim some laps. The water felt different now. Not an escape or a competition arena, but a classroom, a therapy room, a space of possibility. Her phone buzzed on the pool deck. A text from Tommy. Thanks for not giving up on me. See you at opening day. Teacher. Another message followed from her mother. So proud of you, baby. You found your way back to the water and brought others with you. Zara floated on her back, looking at the ceiling. 3 months ago, she'd been invisible, cleaning pools for the wealthy. Now, she thought of Tommy's first successful kick today, of the joy on his face when he felt the water support him, of the other students waiting to discover what was possible. Her certification papers lay on the pool deck, official and heavy with promise. But the real proof was in the water itself, in the ripples that would spread out from this pool, touching lives she hadn't even met yet. Coach Martinez's voice echoed from the doorway. Pool's closing, kid. 5 more minutes, she called back. Fine, but be ready tomorrow. We got 20 new students to prepare for. Zara smiled and dove under the surface. The water embraced her, no longer a reminder of what she'd lost, but a promise of what she could give. In 3 days, this pool would fill with voices, splashes, and laughter. Children who'd been told no would discover what yes felt like in the water. Parents who'd been afraid would see their kids find new freedom. And Zara would be there, no longer the invisible girl, no longer the failed competitor, but something new, a guide, a teacher, a bridge between fear and possibility. She surfaced and pulled herself out of the pool. Tomorrow would bring more preparations, more challenges, more opportunities to help others break through their own barriers. But for now, she stood at the edge and looked at her reflection in the calm water. The face that looked back wasn't the same one that had dove in to save Tommy 3 months ago. This face knew its purpose. This face knew its place. This face knew that sometimes the biggest victories don't come with medals, but with the simple sound of a child laughing in the water for the first time. Zara gathered her things and walked toward the exit. At the door, she turned back one last time. "See you tomorrow," she whispered to the waiting water. Then she stepped out into the night, ready for whatever the next day would bring. After all, she had promises to keep, and 20 students eager to learn what freedom felt like.